The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are fearful of heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. This is the word of the Lord.
Few people connect with God like the prophet Isaiah. He had several extraordinary visions. Like Francis of Assisi and the Christian mystics who came much later, Isaiah had the unique ability to tap into God's dreams for the world and then divulge them to people of faith. Painting vivid scenes with his poetry, he helped people grasp God's longings for the world. He shared God's ideal of a harmonious creation when he wrote, "The wolf shall lie down with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid." He shared God's vision of a world at peace when he wrote, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks." Isaiah channeled God's Spirit and revealed powerful images so that we could picture the future that God expects us to strive toward. Without divine intermediaries, we simply make up the rules ourselves, and whenever human beings do that, it always goes badly. In this morning's vision, Isaiah's poetry throws paint on a canvas that depicts a sweltering, arid land, bursting with blooms like a bountiful garden. He writes, "The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing." However, we have to step back into the previous chapter to fully fathom this vision. In the previous chapter, Isaiah's vision was that the people were doomed. The land soaked with blood, the streams and the soil poisoned. Isaiah's painting was one of utter despair, and it was an accurate picture of what happened to the Hebrew people. The ancient Israelites were divided between a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was totally wiped out. The people in the southern kingdom were taken off to Babylon, where they lived in exile. Now, in the ancient world, if a nation was conquered, then the people would either just die or they would be assimilated into the new culture. They would assume the victorious nation, their God's better than our God, and they would just become a part of that nation, the religion, and the people would just die out. There are ancient civilizations at this same time that we never hear about again. Well, the Hebrew people were facing this prospect. They were at the point of being erased from history. A colleague tells what happened to a close friend of his when he was a student at Northwestern. He took a train into Chicago to hear his teacher, who was playing with the Chicago Symphony. Following the concert, the young man was invited to go backstage and meet some of the different people who played in the symphony. Then afterwards, he was asked if he wanted to go out and join them for a night out to celebrate. It was a really stimulating evening for him. And on his way home, he was reliving all the thrills of the night. It was late, and the train he was riding was completely empty, except that it was full of his excitement. It was full of his hope. Perhaps one day he might play with the symphony. He felt as if a grand future was spread out before him. And then the train made a stop. And in the back of the car, back behind him, when the door opened, someone came in and walked the length of the car and sat down right behind him. Immediately, all thoughts of what might be disappeared. His stomach plunged. His only thought was, I'm not even going to get back to Evanston. There are moments in life when joy can switch to fear in a flash. The breakup of a marriage, the loss of a job, dire results from a pathology report, the death of a loved one. Isaiah's vision of a doomed people whose land is destroyed is apt for such moments. However, it was at this point, when all seemed lost, when the people were in despair and that future totally obliterated, that Isaiah had this vision that we read this morning. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice with blossoms. And Isaiah doesn't stop there. He does not simply hold up a vision of new life where it seemed that there were only death before. He calls on the people to be strong and courageous because God is with them. He says, strengthen the weak hands, make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. Isaiah continues, the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. To defeated people who could not see past the nightmare they were living, Isaiah disclosed this astonishing dream. Don't you wonder how many in his original audience just cursed him? There must have been plenty of skeptics who scoffed at this vision. Look around, Isaiah. Our army's been demolished. Our houses have been plundered. Our fields are destroyed. It's over. When life turns bitter, hearing someone talk about joy can create resentment. I remember a time in my life when everything seemed to be crashing down. I was sad, I was angry, I was confused. The future was frightening because it appeared to me that my bleak situation was only going to get worse. In the midst of that, I remember being invited to a cocktail party that I did not want to attend. I went because I felt like it was an obligation to show up. And people were enjoying themselves, and they were laughing, and talking, and having a great time. And I felt like screaming at them. Uh-oh is right. I wanted to look around at these people who were having these trivial conversations and say, how can you enjoy yourself? Don't you understand people are hurting? And later, I realized how sour I had become. I'd been dealt an injustice, I was feeling wounded, and I wanted everybody else to feel that same pain I was feeling. Eventually, it dawned on me how self-centered I was being. That dragging everyone else down was not going to improve my outlook or boost my spirits. I began to realize that even in the midst of gloom, maybe especially in the midst of gloom, we need to experience joy. Even if I could not blot out my sadness, moments of joy provided a temporary respite and somehow made life a bit more bearable until I had finally worked my way through the lowest part of my grief. I think it's why we often hear people telling jokes and funny stories at a reception after a funeral. We're trying to remember that there's still good in life, even in the face of death. When Isaiah shared this vision with his people, there must have been plenty who wanted to muzzle him. The evidence was overwhelming. The desert was dry. The desert was barren. Not a single crocus was showing its head. And yet, history proved the naysayers wrong. Despite the long odds, those who embraced Isaiah's hope of a new life saw their dreams fulfilled. The people eventually were liberated. They returned to Jerusalem. They rebuilt their lives. Biblical scholar Patricia Tull points out that the story of the Hebrew people's historic resurrection is central to both Jewish and Christian faith. Neither Jews nor Christians would even exist today had this not occurred. Well, of course, Isaiah's vision is not limited to ancient times. It serves as a timeless message of hope to people of faith, because God is always seeking to lead us to a better day. If you choose to be cynical, you can stack up mountains of evidence. It's out there. There are plenty of reasons for despairing about the future. Loved ones die, and so do we. Family can disappoint, friends can betray you. Racism is on the rise. Large swaths of our country are enamored with guns. Drugs destroy individuals and neighborhoods. God neither determines the course of our lives or the course of the world. God reveals the divine dream of what the world can become, and then we are free to make choices that either move us closer and closer to God's dream or further away. God calls, God urges, God challenges us to lean into the future whose foundations are compassion, justice, beauty, peace. God whispers in our depths of new possibilities for transforming our lives and for transforming our world. But we must strengthen our weak hands and make firm our feeble knees. I drove past a vacant lot in a rundown part of town. Weeds were out of control. There were liquor bottles, plastic bags, crack vials. I drove by the same lot again, and I saw a community garden. And there were tomato plants and squash and lettuce. Beautiful flowers blooming. People of all ages and races and religions were weeding and watering. There was laughter, music, and singing. It was quite a vision. What do you see these days? What vision is calling you forward?